Gus Van Sant's 1998 film Psycho. This is, of course, a remake of the Hitchcock classic, and much like with that film, I find this one very difficult to review, but for very different reasons. I don't know if I should be reviewing this or holding it on trial for crimes against humanity. This is a much-hated film, which is weird because it is so close to the beloved original 1960 film. This is just about a shot-for-shot remake. The story is exactly the same. Dialogue is just about the same. Camera angles are recreated exactly in certain cases. The music is the same. It's almost like watching the same movie, sort of. But something's off about it. And it's just hard to judge it based on the normal kind of criteria that you usually judge a movie on, or even a remake on. They say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, but what do they have to say about duplication? The first natural question, I suppose, is why? Why remake Psycho? What is the intention? You got to keep in mind this is 1997, 1998. Not every movie, not every noteworthy horror film was getting remade. Today it's basically more surprising to hear of these types of movies not being remade. So 15 years ago it wasn't the trend it is now. It wasn't expected. It wasn't the natural sort of thing. Like, oh, of course it's getting remade. What else is new? So I don't think that it was like a greedy cash grab or anything like that. I think they went into the film with artful intentions. You have Gus Van Sant at the helm. He's an accomplished director, an Academy Award-nominated director, very talented. So I'm sure he saw it as somewhat an exercise in the filmmaking art, not to reimagine it, but to, not completely change it, to make it more extreme, more edgy, more twisted, nothing like that, but to literally remake it. I remember there was a documentary included on the DVD about the making of the film, titled Psycho Path, appropriately, the making of Psycho. I think it's on YouTube, so check it out if you're interested, where they explore these intentions. And one thing that always stuck out to me, they did these sort of man-on-the-street kind of interviews with younger audiences on like a Friday night film-going crowd, something like that, where they're asked, so Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, have you seen it? What do you think? And some of the responses were like, Psycho? What? Never heard of it. Hitchcock? Who's that? So it's at least something where you think there is a generational gap where Psycho, other than how sacred it is to fans of the original and of the series and fans of Hitchcock, lovers of film in general, it was almost slipping out of the pop culture consciousness. So you could argue that in remaking it, there was an attempt to keep the legacy alive, update it for modern audiences, but not tarnish the material, keep it as close as possible, and that's a somewhat noble intention, sure, but a feat like that, regardless, no matter how successfully it could be accomplished, was just destined to fail, destined to be criticized mercilessly. So either Van Sant and company didn't or couldn't anticipate such a huge, now almost legendary backlash, or they knew very well, and they did it anyway, and they did the best job they could, and stood before the firing squad for the sake of this experiment. It's just so weird, and almost frustrating to think of. We, as the human race, mankind, we've been telling stories for as long as we've existed. Novels, poems, songs, cavemen etching on walls. Film is comparatively such a brand new medium still. And already we're resorting to telling the same stories over and over again, which we do anyway. We see the same kind of stories being told in film after film. The characters are different, situations, settings, different, but there are these templates that are always followed. Like, obviously a big one, the hero's journey, look at Star Wars, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, what have you, where you have the same fundamental groundwork. The themes are still there. It's just told differently. But when we get into a scenario where it's the exact same story, the exact same characters, told the exact same way, I think we begin to take offense. Even that doesn't exactly kind of have a set rule of when it's right to do that, when it's wrong. Like, How many times have we seen a Dickens novel or a Shakespeare play adapted into a movie or a TV miniseries? How many times have we seen those adapted either exactly or with a modern twist, some kind of novelty-based twist to switch up the story? Countless times. But that's taking one medium and turning it into another. So it doesn't necessarily compromise the original work, at least not by our standards or our perceptions. But all of a sudden, if they take a film that's known as a film on its own right, and if we forget for a second that Psycho was based on a book, then that's not right. That's the line, which I guess makes sense because what if someone took one of those great classic novels and wrote it into a new novel, making changes? Then that wouldn't be acceptable. But even that's not necessarily true, because today someone can take a Jane Austen novel, add fucking zombies just cause, and it's a success. So I don't think there is a formula or an organized list of commandments when it comes to these remakes. But one thing that stood out to me about the 1998 version of Psycho was the score. To the untrained ears, they just used the exact same score from the original, but no, that itself is an adaptation. Danny Elfman and Steve Bartek reproduced Bernard Herrmann's score, which on its own rights is a work of art, one of the most recognized film scores of all time. But they just followed the notes, just like an orchestra would follow the notes of Beethoven or Mozart, Tchaikovsky, etc. And it sounds wonderful with modern audio recording and enhancement. Arguably, you could say, it sounds better. But it's still Bernard Herrmann's art. It's his work. That hasn't changed. So Van Sant, you could say, is doing the same thing on an even larger level. Film being such a collaborative effort, mixing so many different arts and techniques, but he's following the notes of Hitchcock's Symphony of Screams. That is Psycho. Or if you prefer, you can look at it this way. You can look at it's a new rendition of a stage play. The script's the same, stage direction's the same, but naturally the cast is going to be different. The director may have slightly different ideas, a different interpretation, and may add his own little signatures here and there, make some changes, make different decisions, but it's still the same work. So I think Psycho, if you can accept what they're going for, set aside certain reservations that you may have based on the original work, forget the general principle behind it. It boils down to two main factors that are going to make or break it. One is Van Sant's direction, and the decisions that he makes in presenting this new version to the audience, and his own personal touches that are brought into it. The second is the cast, under his direction, and how they're able to, once again, bring this story to life. Van Sant, while keeping it as close as possible to the original, he brings both good and bad touches to his version. Mostly little things. The story is updated to take place in 1998, of course, so there's modern touches. Marion stealing $400,000, not $40,000. Lila has her Walkman, headphones, things like that. Some scenes are shortened, others lengthened. Just for example, there's the one scene with Marion's boss and the client, and there's that one part where she's going home sick. He says, "You should spend the weekend in Vegas. Las Vegas is the playground of the world." And she says, "No, I'll be spending the weekend in bed." And in the original, that's the end of the exchange. But here, he adds the line, "That's the only playground that beats Vegas," and which apparently was written for the original, but maybe too suggestive, maybe a little too racy, I don't know, but it's just a little touch that differentiates it. And there's of course the scene at the end with the psychiatrist's explanation, and as hailed as the 1960 version is, I think that's one scene that people are still critical of. Like, it's almost over-explained and almost unnecessary, so this version trims it quite a bit and trusts that the audience gets it. So a bunch of little things like that, and I guess Van Sant wanted to make it a little racier, so there's some different things there. There's a shot of Sam Loomis's bare ass at the beginning, some nudity in the shower scene. Oddly enough, probably the most talked about addition to this movie, the one stamp that this movie sets it apart, is the scene where Norman Bates masturbates while he's peeping on Marion. because obviously that was really necessary. Thank God they put that in. Please, George Lucas, if you're watching this, go back again. Edit the original Star Wars trilogy one more time. Add in some masturbation scenes. That's what we really want to see added. Please. But it's funny. That's just the one thing that tends to always be brought up about this movie. People always bring that up. They'll say, "Oh, Psycho remake, exactly the same." So Norman Bates jerks off, which is interesting. I mean, because really, it's almost symbolic. It's understood. You could almost say the entire movie is one long act of masturbation. So that's something to think on, I guess. One thing I disliked were those little absurdist cutaways in the murder scenes that were just completely pointless. Like when Arbogast is killed, it shows this flash of a blindfolded woman looking at the camera, and then a weird blue cow. Like, what? What's that about? Just really stupid. And the shower scene. Let's talk about the shower scene. A remake of Psycho could be shot for shot, such as this is. Or a complete reimagining. Either way, the scene it will need is the shower scene. Either way, that's going to be troublesome. That's going to be the trouble scene. It's the scene of the movie, and it could not be safe for this one. A viewer could see it coming, or if they know from the original, they could obviously know that when it's going to happen, or they could not. Maybe they weren't aware of it, who knows, but it fails. It really does. It's overblown. Since this is such a well-known scene, it's presented with such a sense of grandeur, emphasized with so much knowledge that it heralds something special. Because it does, that they kind of ruin it. Sure, they keep a lot of it the same, but there's just really things added that make really over-the-top elements into it. Like the camera zooming in sort of slow motion on Marion's first scream. The shot of her pupil dilating, and it cuts away to these shots of storm clouds and thunders roaring. Like, what the fuck? If they're gonna go through so much effort to keep it so similar, and have so many other scenes duplicated exactly, this is absolutely the one scene they should have kept as is. No need to add to it. You don't need to add any more sprinkles to the ice cream, or chocolate syrup, if you will. So some of Van Sant's additions are questionable, sure. Some work okay, but what of the cast? If we're looking at this film from the perspective of being something like a stage play, then one of the most exciting aspects of retelling it has to be the new cast. So especially if it's, something like a Hitchcock story, which always has really juicy supporting characters, which calls for the work of some great character actors. I know some people have issues with the psychiatrist scene, of course, at the end of the movie, but that's a great role for an actor when you think about it. And with someone like Robert Forster in the role, I think he does a great job, and I think he does actually top the original actor. It still is an important scene. The actor has to own the moment, and Forster, he's so compelling and so magnetic that he does just that in a scene that lasts no longer than 3 minutes. William H. Macy, he's great playing the detective Arbogast, and I thought it was top-notch casting. William H. Macy is a private dick. That just makes sense. He fit very well with the role. We got Philip Baker Hall as the sheriff, James Remar as the cop, Chad Everett as the client, Rita Wilson, Mrs. Tom Hanks in the role of Marion's coworker. Very small role, but she's great. And even when it comes to a role like Sam Loomis, I thought an actor like Viggo Mortensen, very much an accomplished actor, was able to bring a little more depth and pity to the kind of one-noted macho character. It made him almost more of kind of an anti-hero, which I liked. And the same can be said of Julianne Moore, playing Lila Crane. She's not the damsel in distress. She makes it a very take-charge, no-nonsense kind of character, an in-control character. So it's almost like the two have switched their dynamics for this version. And it's amazing that they can do that with practically the same dialogue. But it can be reinterpreted just by their attitudes. So it's kind of cool that they're able to do that, and also pretty cool that they added in Lila kicking Norman in the face at the end. So girl power. But we can nickel and dime this movie till the weird blue cows come home. The two key roles, the two crucial performances are from Marion Crane and the Norman Bates characters. You probably don't need me to tell you this, but in the 1998 version, they are sadly, severely miscast. Anne Heche isn't nearly as likable as Marion, and it's hard to say exactly why, but the character comes off as, I don't know, just careless and stupid in her crime, and not the desperate femme fatale that she should be. Again, I think it boils down to the attitude behind the role. This is not a character that we secretly want to turn back and get home safely, even though we know what awaits her in the shower. This is a character that I guess we simply wait out in this version until the plot performs the way it's supposed to perform. And there's really no investment in her. In this version, we as the audience, likely already familiar with the original, expect her death. And somehow this time around, may develop the feeling that maybe she deserves it. Vince Vaughn is even worse, sadly. And hey, I like Vince Vaughn, I really do. But in the role of Norman Bates, he is just not up to snuff. The character is much more rounded in his creepiness, and he lacks the boyish charms of Perkins that may cause us to let our guard down, which is kind of the point. He has more aggression to him, but unlike with the Julianne Moore, it's unwelcome. If you look at a scene from the 1960 original, such as the fantastic parlor scene, and compare it to this one, it's stunning how off it is here. There is no chemistry, and these two characters, both so unlikable, just kind of jabber at each other, absolutely joylessly. The lines are exactly what they used to be. The camera is where it was in 1960, but the spirit is unfortunately absent. This is a critical scene, and I think for lovers of the original, this was the moment where you had to decide if you like this movie, this version, or not. Most have not. But it could have worked better with different actors. Maybe it would have salvaged the movie. Maybe Gus Van Sant's experiment may have proved just a little more successful. But we'll never really know. This remake ultimately is harmless. I'll personally still give it a watch from time to time, just for the sake of comparing and contrasting. It's interesting in that respect. I don't think it tarnishes the original or anything. It's still available in its original form. You can find the DVD or Blu-ray anywhere. It hasn't been replaced. This movie has failed on its own terms. You could look at it as a filmmaking blasphemy. You could look at it as a noble experiment. You could not look at it at all. Still live a happy life. I rate Gus Van Sant's Psycho 2 stars out of 4. I can appreciate the effort and the sentiment behind it, but it's ruined by some small details and some poor casting decisions. If it's a copy, then it's half as good. That's my review of the remake of Psycho. I guess a bit of a rant. But yeah, I know most people hate this movie, but the thing is, it always depends on who you ask. So, what's your reason for hating the movie? What I kind of brought up here makes sense, or do you hate it for your own reasons? What's so bad about this movie? Please comment, let me know below. I'd be very curious. As always, subscribe, follow me on social media, links below. Watch out for more reviews in this series. There are more coming soon. Until then, thanks very much for watching.